All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and call this Assembly Committee on Housing and Homelessness to order. We are noticed today from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. at City Hall, room 155. This is a change from some of our prior meetings where we've met at the Assembly chambers for probably like the last couple of years. It is my intention for us to meet here at City Hall for all of our Housing and Homelessness Committee meetings here on out, unless there is something that I know is going to be attracting a very large crowd. So apologies if there isn't room in the audience right now. Um, so um, moving on, we'll go ahead and do call to or introductions, starting with over here.
Joey Sweet.
Kevin Cross.
Felix Rivera. And then on the phone, we have Assembly members Austin Quinn Davidson.
Hi, everyone.
Assembly member Salt.
Here.
Great. And then Assembly member Dern.
Here.
Wonderful. I understand that Assembly member Constant is going to be a little bit late to the meeting. Okay. So the first thing we have on our agenda is initial audience participation. We have two individuals signed up for initial audience participation, Mr. Oliva and Miss Bradford. As I understand it, Mr. Oliva went to the Lusac Library, so he is on his way, and when he gets here, we will get to him for his initial audience participation. As I understand it, Ms. Bradford should be on the phone. So I'm just going to double check. Mr. Turner, is it *6 for Miss Bradford to... Okay, so Miss Bradford, if you can press *6, that'll allow you to unmute yourself and you will be able to speak. You'll have 3 minutes. Miss Bradford, are you with us? Again, it is *6 to unmute yourself, and then you should be able to speak. All right, not hearing Miss Bradford. Please, Miss Bradford, if you are on the line, please email me if you're having technical issues, and we'll try to address those. Otherwise, we will get to Mr. Oliva when he arrives. Okay, so some introductory remarks before we get started. First, I just want to note for the record that Mr. Volan has arrived. First, thanks everyone for your flexibility with changing the time of the meeting. We usually meet at 11 o'clock. This was done at the request of the administration so that any parties interested could attend the virtual housing and homelessness advocacy day. So I hope that that went well. We have a lengthy agenda today, as usual. Unfortunately, I am going to have to place artificial time limits on our conversation. So we will be spending 35 minutes to cover as many of the topics as possible under unfinished business. We will then spend another 35 minutes to cover the final two topics under unfinished business, specifically around those last 2 bullet points on demobilization. I'm going to ask for some flexibility to make sure that we cover the most important topics in the first 35 minutes of our business. Before we get started, I just really wanted to quickly address the Arctic Rec Center, as I know that several people in the audience, as well as folks on the phone, are here because of some of the recent news. Whoops. We will not be discussing the Arctic Rec Center today. Instead, we have scheduled a work session on March 31st from 12:40 to 2:10 p.m. to discuss the need for a permanent year-round low-barrier shelter from a broader perspective. That discussion will likely include the Arctic Rec Center along with other possible alternatives. Because, and that meeting is going to be in this room so far. That's what's scheduled. Because I know that there is a lot of interest on this topic, I have put together a statement on my own views, emphasis on my, and invite members of the public to review that statement and reach out to me at any time. That statement's also on the committee website, so if folks on the phone want to go to the Assembly website, go to the Housing and Homelessness Committee, you'll be able to find the statement there. A statement was also released by Assembly Chair Suzanne LaFrance, which members of the public can view on the Assembly website under press releases. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Again, if Mr. Leva shows up, we will go ahead and pause for him. Is he? Oh, Miss Bradford is here. Oh, okay, great. Welcome. Come on in, Miss Bradford. If you can go ahead and sit here and speak into the mic, I will put on a timer for 3 minutes. Right here. Just. We are not. No.
So that's why I'm here.
Yeah. So you can speak for 3 minutes as part of initial audience participation. Yeah. You're good.
Okay, so thank you. Sorry I'm late. So I came to discuss the Arctic Rec Center and the possibility of it getting turned to a homeless shelter. The news just hit us a few days ago in my Windermere neighborhood, which is directly across the street from the rec center. So we are in a panic. I mean, we are sick to our stomachs because it is so close. It's directly across the street to a huge, wonderful neighborhood filled with many children, a ginormous neighborhood school, 2 parks. One of them is Pop Car Park, where it's for smaller toddlers and preschool age children. And there is a remodeled tennis court where I took lessons as a kid, which is amazing. And it's busy in the summer. And we're trying to figure out whose bright idea was this to have this shelter so close to a neighborhood and businesses and a church. We're trying to figure it out, and we are coming together strong. We've been door to door. We've made flyers already. And I know it's just a consideration, but I'm still just baffled that it's even being considered. And homelessness is an issue. We know it. We see it. We've all driven by 3rd Avenue downtown, Brother Francis, the Sullivan. We see what's happened to that location and heard stories from friends in the community. So I don't want to see that happen to our wonderful little community of Windermere. None of us do. So we just want to get more input. It's kind of troubling to me that we became aware of it this way. It seems like it's so close to our little community that we would have heard something about this sooner, I think. So we just want some questions answered and to voice our concerns. We're going to keep voicing them. I mean, we're going to keep emailing, and we're trying to show a lot of grace. I'm trying to show some grace. But I am very concerned as a mom of 3 kids in that neighborhood. And I know there was so much more I wanted to say, but yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for participating. Just a couple, before I get to you, Mr. Oliva, just quick reminders. Just like I said in my introductory remarks, there is going to be a work session on March 31st. So invite members of the public to attend that. And then if any members of the public are interested in learning about my own views on this, I would invite you to, there should be a printed statement out on the table. I invite you to take that, look that over, and then feel free to contact me at any time. But thank you so much. We'll go ahead and turn over to Mr. Oliva. Apologies for any confusion, Mr. Oliva, but glad you made it here. If you want to go ahead and take a seat, turn on the mic, you will have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Felix. I think it's a conspiracy.
Okay. Okay.
Can you pass this along? Are you ready, Felix? Okay. 3 minutes. Okay, I'm Ronald Leva. I'm adjacent property owner of Brother Francis Shelter. The city was supposed to buy my property. Two different purchases. The double lots across the street, which is now a power pole lot, Mr. Gates.
Mr. Oliva, just for folks on the phone, could you speak into the mic a bit more?
Oh.
Thanks.
You want me to sit down?
Be easier to speak into the mic, yeah.
Okay, give me 30 seconds, sir, Felix. Well, anyway, Mr. Gates, they were going to, ML&P put away 1.1 million to buy the parcels in their capital acquisition by Assemblyman Evans and Starr. They used that money and rented it, and they had a letter of intent that if they purchased the property with the remaining capital funds, which was 700,000, whatever they shorted me would be made up on the next parcel. And they were going to give me 900,000, but Mr. Gates, being the sharpest attorney I know, found out that that had to be reviewed. So just to show you the evidence, I gave you a packet that the shortage was never made up because the municipality never bought my property. And they said they ran out of money. Well, they really didn't, but they went ahead and put on a contingency for a $50,000 study by Agnew Beck. And after the study, they concluded and recommended to buy the property. In fact, Wagner put out a press release that they bought it for 1.8 million. That transaction didn't go through because of multiple legal issues caused by the homeless themselves. And the assembly in my 58 emails telling you to provide a space for me to bring the inventory of the municipality. Condensing this, you have the money. You have remaining money from the ML&P purchase. And that's all you have to do is, as you can see in the packet here, I cut that dead tree on my driveway easement. Again, a homeless related incident. And what it turned out to be, I got sued for that dead spruce. And look at the judgment. It's $327,000 plus interest plus attorney fees. So for a dead spruce tree that I cut 5 years after that picture, and a Mayday tree, which this municipality, with this, oh, that's 3 minutes, Felix. I get 30 extra seconds because of the interruption.
I will give you 10 extra seconds.
Oh,
Just finish your thought, Mr. Oliva.
my thought is, can you write me a check? Because the mayor approved this. Chris Constant knows it's true. And it all goes to that judgment that basically wiped me out through inverse condemnation. Now, I'd like to answer any questions because I've been here multiple times. Mr. Cross tried to ask questions, but I was trespassed from the assembly chambers illegally. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Oliva.
Everyone who agrees that they're going to give me the money at the next assembly meeting,
So,
don't
Mr.
raise your
Oliva,
hand.
I don't see anyone. That
That's
has
a unanimous
questions.
decision. Thank you all. I'll expect don't even put in the amount.
Yeah,
Just
thank
sign
you,
the
Mr.
check.
Oliva. Thank you, Mr.
The way
Oliva.
you guys spend money, you'll probably do that.
Your time is up. I appreciate it. So we're going to go ahead and move on. So that is it for initial audience participation. I have attempted to program today so that we will have time for 3 or 4 individuals to participate in final audience participation, all depending on how this discussion goes. I'm going to go ahead and start the 35 minutes for the beginning part of this conversation. And here we go. Okay, so shelter licensing discussion is the first item under unfinished business. In 2021, the Assembly approved AO 2021-055S1, which set up a licensing requirement for homeless and transient shelters. That ordinance set a deadline of January 1st, 2023 for all shelters within the MOA to obtain a license. Although I wanted to have this presentation before that deadline, other issues overtook our agenda. I think it is important for this committee to understand how this ordinance has been implemented, and so hopefully we will hear that today. With that, I'll turn over to the administration for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Can we pull up the presentation that I sent or Alexa sent? That's not it. There we go. Okay, so shelter licensing.
Actually, I'm not sure that that's the most recent one. Travis, there was one that I just emailed you. It was just sent like
Yeah.
a couple minutes before the meeting that I emailed you.
The date on it would say 3/7/2023. I kept trying to keep the date up to date, but
Okay.
I can start talking while he finds it. So the bottom line is that it's been very interesting in implementing a shelter licensing and getting all the background research. So I have with me today my homelessness planner, who I basically made him bury himself for 6 months into research and data to find out best practices and figure out what is the best way to implement it. If we go to, that's the agenda, but we don't have to waste time. So the bottom line is, if you go to the next slide and then the next slide, the bottom line is that there are no code changes that we are recommending. We are trying to implement it as is. We had several legal reviews, and we know if there's anything additional that we were wanting to implement outside the code, we would need to bring forward code changes. The truth is that we don't really know what would need to be changed until we figure out that there's a problem. And right now, we have overcome everything we thought could be a problem. So now it's kind of a wait and see. The recommendations provided are based on best practices, and all of our materials have been reviewed by legal, and you're going to see the number of people that we've collaborated with. Next slide. So this was a full project plan that I did that was handed to Michael when he started in May. He was compiling research. He met with stakeholders. And the biggest part was developing the policies and procedures. And today we're going to provide a progress update, and then we just want any feedback that you guys have. Next slide. So just kind of the project overview. There was, I would just assume to keep going if, okay, so the research phase, there is a lot of best practices. We looked at all of the assembly meetings from when this was being debated. We looked at best practices. We looked at other policies and procedures for the very few places we could find that had shelter licensing. And we had to coordinate with multiple municipal departments because as 16.125, it asks to make sure that they are basically within code of several different things, such as environmental health for food sanitation, Title 21, all those kind of things. Then we did the infrastructure development. This was probably, even though it looks short, it was the most cumbersome phase because it was going back and forth and figuring out what was the best way to implement and interpret some of the language in the code. And then now we're at implementation. Good, next slide. So the research phase, you see that this was a very, a lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings to talk with cities, states, organizations, community councils, local providers, municipal departments. So we have feedback, and we have also documented all of the feedback in a document on how we came up with shelter licensing. Next slide. And this, one of the biggest conclusions is that shelter licensing as it exists in Title 16.125 is not a common practice across the country. I know that you were provided some documents from other places that had implemented shelter licensing, but it looked a lot different than what was ended up being passed in 16.125. Just the regulatory scheme. So this does fall under the Anchorage Health Department. The Housing and Homeless Coordinator is the division manager. I am the program manager of the Housing and Homeless Services. And these are the 5 parts of shelter licensing that we will manage: the applications, the complaints, the shelter inspections, technical assistance, and then the documentation. Because this is a municipal code, all of anybody who is going to inspect or be a part of shelter licensing, we are code enforcement officers now for 16.125, so that if this does end up going to administrative hearings, so if there's issues, complaints, waivers, anything like that that can't be resolved on the health department level, it ends up going to an administrative hearing similar to childcare licensing and other processes. So since late January on our website, we have had posted everything that you could use to educate yourself. I think I also had this sent to the assembly somewhere around the beginning of February. If you go to the next slide, this is just a breakdown. So the license application is online. We'd asked all the identified shelters to apply by February 17th. That was after the day when we were originally supposed to present it. We did receive all but one application. There's also a variance or waiver, and that is for somebody who needs a variance or waiver based on the policies and procedures, a barrier crime waiver based on the language that is in the code. And then we have several documents that will help you understand different components of how we expect things, or those are information sheets. So the determination method, we determined it by the definitions that were put in 16.125. We then developed questions that would start to eliminate places that would obviously not be homeless shelters, such as a library. A library, even though it has homeless clients in it and it had the community resource coordinators, that was not a place that was primarily used for homeless and transient shelters or overnight shelter and day shelter by the definition. We tried to use Title 21, but it did not reference that the agencies had to be identified as homeless and transient shelters under Title 21. It just said they had to be in compliance with Title 21. Also, there are many shelters that do not have a conditional use and meet the definitions of overnight shelter and day shelter. When somebody submits their application, I try to break this down as little as possible. There's a lot of moving parts in here, but we received the shelter license application and we haven't yet started processing because we really did want to get feedback from this committee. Our team starts processing it. If they only submitted just the application and not the accompanying documents like the fire inspection, their policies, procedures, things like that, then they have an additional 30 days to do that. We haven't done anything with those applications, but we've received them. We would then issue a 90-day provisional license for everybody who has submitted an application, because at that point we have to start routing it through the municipal departments. And then also there is a public notice requirement that is written into the code as well. So it requires a public notice, but no public hearing. And that is a 21-day process. And then after the public notice is complete, the application is approved, there will be a shelter inspection. And this is really a low-level shelter inspection because most of the items in the code are already being looked at by the subject matter experts. For example, if they're serving food, they have a food license permit. If they are a childcare facility, they are inspected by childcare licensing, all those kind of things. And then step 4 is we plan to bring forward legislation similar to that of the marijuana and alcohol tax to say we would like formal approval of this as a shelter. Now, those licenses are eligible, are good for 3 years, and we have put a very low cost on it because we wanted to be non-burdensome to the shelters. And so right now our fee is set as $100 for a 3-year license. This is just kind of a Gantt chart to kind of show you the overflow of how long it could potentially take. So it could potentially take up to 120 days, but a lot of that can be shortened based on how fast things are approved if they turn their documents in with the initial application. And of course, at any point, we will continue to extend the provisional license as we work with the shelters to meet the requirements. So far, our feedback from the shelters is this has really been non-burdensome for them. They're turning in documents they already have, and we're just gathering them and making sure they meet the requirements of 16.125. Next slide. The background checks, it's very interesting. So the Department of Public Safety, they, in order to set up an account with the Department of Public Safety, you have to have a state code that you fall under. And unfortunately, shelter licensing does not fall under it. We believe we have found a route in working with them in which we will be able to meet that requirement using the Department of Public Safety. But it's a lot of things. Next slide. So this is just kind of the enforcement overview. You've kind of seen this in a different form, but we respond to complaints. So if there's a complaint about the shelter, we inspect the shelters, we provide technical assistance. So if there's anything they're having issues meeting, we will do everything we can to ensure that they can help them, that we can help them to meet the requirements. And then we document appropriately simply because If it goes to administrative hearing, that is a lot of documentation. Next slide. So the inspections, there's one unannounced inspection per year and one scheduled inspection per year. The complaint process, we have a phone number that we can receive complaints through, as well as through InkWorks. And they'll all be documented. They'll have an inquiry, and if warranted, they will have an investigation conducted. For violations, we're going to work with shelters to create plans of improvement. We currently don't have a fee schedule. We understand that it can't exceed $300, but again, our idea is not to make this burdensome for the shelters. And so far, we don't know what a fine would look like and what for it would be. We just know it wouldn't exceed $300. Overall, our mission is this is a great way to create relationships, provide support to shelters, and guarantee a minimum standard of care for clients. There's been lots of views of shelter licensing, and I believe in all of the work that we have done that this has become a non-burdensome process in which we're just making sure that everybody is in compliance with what the title says. Are there any questions?
Great, thank you for that presentation. So I'll go ahead and start and then go to other members. So I will be brief considering our time limitations today. Who is currently licensed in the municipality?
There is nobody currently licensed. As I stated, we have several applications that are in. Out of the 10 places identified, there is one that has not submitted anything, but we've been waiting for feedback from this group because it's been important for us.
Okay, so do you have like a projected timeline when you expect folks to have at least a provisional license?
As soon as we receive the feedback from this group and incorporate it, we'll start processing them. They'll get provisional licenses theoretically. We have 9, so I can't promise it's like a 24-hour turnaround, but
Sure.
within a reasonable time, they'll get their 90-day provisional licenses.
Okay. Have you received any feedback on the process from providers?
We receive feedback on every level of the process from providers. And so far, we haven't received any complaints or anything like that. So,
Okay.
no.
Great. Yeah, I think for my part, what I'm most interested in is now that this is actually in place and shelters are going to be going through this for the first time, sort of what their immediate feedback is. So if you could just keep us in the loop on that, happy to be nimble. Does the division foresee the need for any additional staffing to do particularly any of that enforcement work?
I don't have an exact answer to that. We have estimated the number of man hours. Currently, our group is understaffed, as you've heard with the Anchorage Health Department staffing. So once we get fully staffed, I would be better able to assess that.
Thank you. Do other members have questions? I'll pause to see if anyone on the phone has a question. Yeah, so this presentation was posted. This is part of the tricky thing with having meetings where agendas span multiple meetings. So this presentation was first posted on the February 15th meeting, but we'll make sure that this presentation gets posted again, this latest version, under today's agenda. All right, I'm not seeing anyone else. Great, well, I will certainly mull this presentation over, and if I have any additional feedback, I will just reach out to the division directly. But I appreciate you taking the time. It's great to see this process implemented and just curious to see what it's like. Okay, not seeing anything else, then we will go ahead and move on in our discussion. Next on our agenda is the ACEH, Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness Housing Summit overview. So the coalition held a housing summit in January, and as we are the Housing and Homelessness Committee, I thought it would be a good idea for us to get an overview of what was discussed at the summit. So if someone from, great, thank you, Ms. Ware, go ahead.
Taria Ware, the Director of Policy and Systems Planning at the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. We did hold a housing summit at ACH and also did it hybrid. And the information is on our website, along with it being emailed to over the 100 participants during that time between in person and online. We had the pleasure of having our HUD Region Secretary, Margaret Salazar, come and talk with us as a group and really talked about the data that the pillars, and we're not calling it pillars for our community, but the pillars that HUD is looking for all communities to kind of gather against to really look at ending or addressing homelessness. One of the things that was mentioned by our executive director is the difference between Alaska and other places is that the data, it seems like if you looked at our data, our homeless numbers measure more like a Houston model or a Seattle model because of our population, but that is not how HUD views the data. So I think last time when you had this meeting, Meg talked about how we received the least amount kind of per the states. We got the single digits. Other states like California were getting 44 million, 2-digit numbers to address homelessness. And Alaska still remained like under 10,000, I believe was our allotment. So really trying to change what HUD's view is of like our population, especially since it's so expansive and reaches across the state. The other things we talked about were the integration of the landlord housing partnership and how integral that has been in housing those in our community. So we did a deep dive with the folks in the room and online and really had a dynamic conversation of what does it mean to house someone, how do we maintain stable housing? And then broke it down into leases and the barriers to get to a lease. So a lot of the information that we did, or a lot of the discussion, was really into the weeds, as we call it, of what stops Johnny from being housed, or what gets him out of housing as soon as you house him. And I think what we learned from the conversation about leases and barriers, transitional housing and permanent supportive housing, we also talked about the eviction diversion program, is we learned that we need to have more of these dynamic conversations throughout the community and give them a space to be able to bring all of that to the table. So that is part of the next steps. The other challenge that was brought into the room was about our aging housing in Anchorage and how we do have a lot of condemnations that are happening and that it displaces those that are currently housed. And so we're hoping as we move forward, there will be many summits on specific things because it was a lot to talk about over a wonderful 2 days, but we realized we need more time. And those would be like getting into the data, getting into the housing stock, looking at housing or affordable housing, period, throughout our community. So that's the synopsis. This was a presentation from 2 months ago. So hopefully that was great.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Ware, and very excited to continue the conversations and attend future housing summits. Any discussion from the members? Just checking my phone. Okay, not seeing anyone. Well, thank you so much. All right. Next on our agenda, we have the discussion on home ARP funds. So as I understand it, we are quickly approaching a federal deadline for us to program and send to HUD for approval how we plan to spend approximately $2.7 million in home ARP funds. For my part, I think it would be a shame for us to lose that funding. So can the administration please speak to this issue? When is that deadline, if you could remind me, and what are we doing to get that work done?
Through the chair, I'm going to bring up Jed, and he works with the health department, and I'll allow him to introduce himself.
Thanks, Alexis. I'm Jed Drolet, Senior Neighborhood Planner with Anchorage Health Department. I handle the HUD applications for our formula grants and various HUD funding, CDBG, home, and ESG. We are working diligently to meet that deadline. Deadline is March 31st to submit what's called the allocation plan for the home ARP funding. It's been a little confusing because home ARP is kind of a special allocation of funding with different rules than the usual HUD entitlement grants we get. Ordinarily, we have an annual planning process where we do an annual action plan to program the funding for the formula grants that we get, including the regular home investment partnerships program. And there's a regular cycle of that, and that there's a deadline in August that we have to get that to. Home ARP is a separate allocation. It's part of the home program, but it was part of the American Rescue Plan Act, and it is somewhat more targeted funding. It has a different set of rules, particularly with regard to the planning of how to do the allocation. Part of that ended up being that for a long time, there was no specific deadline for the plan. And then a few months ago, they gave us a specific deadline that was very soon, which is now March 31st. There's a streamlined process, so we will be able to make that deadline, but another aspect of that process is that, unlike in our regular planning process, there's a very detailed consultation process with a wide variety of very specifically specified types of organizations that we were required to do before releasing a public draft of the plan. So ordinarily, we do our consultation process and release a draft and get public comment, and that's all a pretty open process. In this case, especially once they set that very soon deadline, we had to kind of jump into the consultation. We've been working really closely with ACEH. They provide a ton of data and guidance and feedback on that. And then we put out the draft of the plan. It's a streamlined process with a 15-day public comment period rather than 30. That public comment period ended on Monday, so we are through that. We did a public hearing last week. Due to the kind of this streamlined nature of the process, we probably have not gotten the word out as well as we might have hoped to on what is actually in our plan there, but it is posted on our website, on the health department website, the Community Safety and Development Program. We have our draft plan there. Just a high level breakdown of how we are proposing to divide that up is to put about $1.5 million into supportive services, about $500,000 into development of new affordable rental housing, and then a couple of smaller portions of that. You can use up to 5% of the grant on each of operating fund support and capacity building support for nonprofits. Something that you can't usually fund with these grants is as general operating funds. And so that's kind of an unusual opportunity to build up some of that capacity. And so we're proposing to do that as well. That's the high level view. You can take a look at the plan. It's not very long. It's just maybe 30 pages or so. It's on our website, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Great, thanks. So I have a few questions and then happy to go into the queue. So first is just a simple request. Could you please send a link to that draft plan to the assembly?
Yeah, I will send that.
Thank you. Where does the public hearing happen? Did that happen at hand or in another form?
In this case, we do often have those at the Hand Commission. In this case, because of the timing, we did a separate hearing. That the way we do those is we typically have those at the Health Department building and then also stream through Microsoft Teams. And we did the public notice through the ADN, and that provided the login, call-in information, and all that. Again, we did have some people show up. It was, it was not as big a turnout as we'd hoped for some of our hearings, but we did get the word out to some extent to get people there.
Thanks. A couple more questions from me, and then I'll go into the queue. First is, did the Hand have a chance to look at this?
They have had a look. Yeah, I presented at the last Hand Commission meeting. We were hoping to do the public hearing at that meeting, but the timing didn't quite work out to do the notice in time. But I did do a presentation there, and that actually those meetings are recorded. And so if people want to go back and look at that, you can see that recording of that presentation. We can also provide a copy of that PowerPoint.
Great. And last question is, what's the Assembly's role in here? Does the Assembly need to approve the plan?
The Assembly does need to approve the plan. We've got that submitted into OnBase, and it's moving forward. So,
thanks. So is that like something that's going to come on the addendum for the 21st meeting?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. I'm not seeing any. Okay. So All right, we have 9 minutes left and two really important topics to talk about. So I am going to try to be really fast. Thank you so much, Jed. All right, so ERA2 funding utilization. Last year, during the December 6th Assembly meeting, we passed AR 2022-363 as amended. And this has been a topic discussed at this committee before, which is why I put this under unfinished business. I wanted to get an update from the administration on implementation of those funds. I believe it was $8 million, and especially the implementation of Section 3 of that resolution, which reads as follows. Quote, "To the intent of part of these funds is to support housing individuals experiencing homelessness, whether through the municipality's emergency shelter plan as defined in AMC, blah, blah, to include congregate, non-congregate, semi-congregate emergency shelter and traditional housing or through other housing opportunities such as hotel conversions," end quote. So part of the issue here stems from the possibility of evictions at the former guest house, as well as issues that ACEH, the coalition, addressed in a letter sent to the body today. So can the administration just please speak to the implementation of these funds and the flexibility of these funds, particularly for usage at our hotel conversions? Thanks.
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, we have entered into a contract with AHFC, and they have identified two programs that exist to currently house people in congregate and non-congregate shelter. The stabilization program, the providers that are able to provide assistance for both congregate and non-congregate shelter through AHFC are NeighborWorks, Choices, Catholic Social Services, House of Transformation, Covenant House, and Partners for Progress. And the following organizations provide case management and housing assistance through AHFC for congregate shelter only, and that's Beans Cafe, Rural Cap, and Volunteers of America. Some of those agreements are just being finalized between AHFC and those entities, and so we'll probably see something within the next 10 days for utilization. As far as the hotel conversions, if we're talking about like the Lakeshore, we had heard that the people who were going to the Lakeshore had source of income and that they were already identified from the CE list to have income, and that was without the ERA funding. So if there's new questions, or new people that would qualify for ERA for that location. I don't know anything as far as the Barrett in ERA funding.
Thank you. Can you speak specifically to the guest house and ERA funding?
Yeah, so these ERA funding streams are for people, this is financial support for people who are experiencing homelessness, and currently people at the guest house are considered housed.
Right, they're housed right now, but unless they are able to get funding to maintain that housing, they will quickly be unhoused, possibly. What are we doing to prevent that from happening?
Yeah, so this funding is only for people who qualify under their eligibility requirements. And then one of the following additional criteria, and that's persons who are currently in congregate or non-congregate shelter or semi-congregate shelter, people who are sleeping unsheltered outside, and priority for domestic violence, human trafficking, and refugees. If they don't follow or fall under those categories, they do not qualify for this funding.
Thanks. I guess one last question for me, and then happy to open it up, although we're quickly approaching the end of our first 35 minutes. So I guess one of the issues that I am having is that there appears to be a bit of a pointing of fingers between the AHFC, all the acronyms, and the administration. So when I talk to AHFC about the criteria, they tell me talk to the health department because they're the ones that determine the criteria. But now I'm hearing that you're saying that those criteria are really being determined by AHFC. So could you just tell me like who is really in charge of determining those criteria? And if it's true that the municipality is in charge of determining those criteria, then why didn't we follow that Section 3 that was in the resolution that explicitly outlined the ability for us to use these funds at hotel conversions?
Yeah, so under that assumption, the hotel conversions were new ones that were coming online. The focus is actually on the client and not on the property itself. And so when we had discussed the new contract, we had worked with the coalition and they said we wanted to focus on non-congregate because that was something that we didn't have qualified under the first ERA. And there was an issue between housing people in non-congregate shelter settings. And that was the addition during the S version that you guys had made to include that. And so because Section 3 says this supports people who are experiencing homelessness and people who are at the guest house are not experiencing homelessness, they are housed. They do not qualify for this funding. If you have people that are experiencing homelessness that are in congregate, non-congregate, semi-congregate shelter, and they would like to be housed at one of the new hotel conversions, that would be an allowable use.
Thanks. I guess I'll just provide a quick comment and then see if any other members have questions. And then we need to do one more topic before we get to demobilization. So I think for my part, I think the logic behind what's happening here is very twisted to me. I mean, basically we're saying folks at the guest house, which I think we're talking about like 52 individuals, in order for you to qualify for this funding, we got to kick you out, we got to make you homeless, and then maybe you can qualify for this funding. And I just don't understand that logic. It doesn't seem humane to me. And I don't need a response. So anyone from the administration, or excuse me, anyone from the assembly have any comments? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Cross.
So it's emergency relief assistance. So it depends on how you quantify and how you define emergency. And so I think that's the holdup. So just look at the definition, because is a person housed in an emergency situation? So do they qualify? So I think that's what it comes down to. It just comes down to semantics. So maybe we need to amend the, if you want to see that expanded, maybe you amend the description of emergency. Because I mean, is that my understanding? It's emergency relief funds. So a person housed, you might argue, is not an emergency situation, where this is for someone who's on the street. So what is the qualifiers?
So right now we have roughly 750 people who are in congregate, non-congregate, and semi-congregate shelter, not to mention the other people who are unhoused. That data I don't have in front of us, but the priority is to get those people into housing rather than, I shouldn't say rather than, but the focus is on those because they are in an emergency situation, because emergency cold weather sheltering is ending April 30th. The priority is to get people who are in shelter housed. And because there's limited funding, that's how this money was allocated.
Thanks. Getting to your other point, Mr. Cross, if there is any type of amendments that we need to make as a body to further clarify, although I believe it is fairly clear in the resolution, then I am happy to work with the administration to make those further clarifications so that we don't inadvertently create 52 new homeless individuals, or rather force them to experience homelessness again. Okay, briefly, because I need to move on to
I'll just say it does seem kind of cyclical. And I just wonder about using these funds for homelessness prevention, sort of, stopping an emergency before it happens. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on us to our last topic. Even though we only have a minute, I will eat into our other 35 minutes because I think it's important. So next topic is the Sullivan Arena oversight. So when the Assembly approved AR 2023-43, we amended the item to include funding for third-party oversight for the Sullivan Arena, Aviator Hotel, and Alex Hotel. I wanted to get an update from the administration on implementation of that amendment. And then I also invited Ms. McLaughlin here to speak about her work plan. So let's go ahead and start with the administration, then we'll go to Ms. McLaughlin. Can you please speak to the implementation of that amendment?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, we are currently working to alleviate some issues with Title VII in regards to this contract. Because it was a grant and because Restorative Reentry Services is a for-profit company, they are not eligible to receive a grant. And so I'm working with law and I'm working with purchasing to abide by Title VII to get this done. We've been in constant communication with Ms. McLaughlin and we're attempting to work through this. And I'll let Ann give a legal opinion on this as well.
Through the chair, Ann Helzer, acting municipal attorney. This was something that came up. There's the definition of what a grant is. We're not sure if the assembly members intended this to be a grant or that was just a mistake. But either way, I think we've just established that we don't see a problem with it because the definition of grant doesn't exclude for-profit companies. So we don't think there's going to be a problem, but we do have to communicate this to our purchasing department. And so we're in the process of working that out. If we have any issues, we will work with you to correct them. But I'm not anticipating that there's any problem with this being a grant. Thank you.
Thanks. So I appreciate that. So given that you don't think there's any issues, how quickly do you think we could get a grant agreement signed?
Through the chair, we are going to work extremely hard because we have a very short string on this. And frankly, it's a good thing that it's being implemented. And we want this to happen. And so we just need to work with purchasing, which I expect to happen today, and get this done. So it's a priority.
Thank you so much. I think for before I go to anyone else in the queue for questions for the administration, just a quick comment for me. I appreciate that it is a high priority for the administration because speaking for myself, it is a high priority for me. Just in the last week, I have heard some fairly disturbing things about what is going on at some of these locations. And, a big reason that we wanted this third party oversight is so that we could create a better environment for the clients. And so I appreciate that this is important for the administration. Any other folks in the queue for the administration before we turn to Ms. McLaughlin?
Ms.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chair Rivera, just one other thing. If for any reason we have an issue with the purchasing department with the definition of grant or what have you, I don't anticipate there will be. But if there is, there's also a mechanism for the mayor to waive requirements typically required under Title VII. And because this is in the overall benefit of the municipality, we will pursue that. So.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I would definitely encourage if there's any creative thinking, whether that's back pay or mayoral waiver to quicken the process, I certainly would encourage that. Not seeing anyone else in the queue, then I'll go ahead and turn to Ms. McLaughlin. If you could please speak to some of your work plan and what you're intending to do. Thanks.
McLaughlin, and I own Restorative and Reentry Services, LLC. I have met since last Tuesday with Andy Nestor, Michael Hughes, Sean Hayes from Henning Inc., and a few other people just to see what the scope should be, since there was some uncertainty as far as what the level of oversight would be. And I came up with a 4-point plan. The first one is to do an organizational assessment. It's basically called a 360 assessment. It can be done fairly quickly. I've done these before, and it is not going to be fancy. It is going to be very expedited. It would take approximately 4 or 5 days. I have gotten permission whenever I'm allowed to from Henning Inc. to go into the various properties to make sure that all of the individuals that need to be reviewed and the overseeing of the process and the operations was to occur expeditiously. The second piece is I am a very open and transparent person. I like facts. I don't like assumptions. And so I would like to make sure that if I find any gaps or any concerns, that there is a process that is in real time will address those issues straight away. And in talking with the health department and also with Henning Inc., I think they're also open to this kind of a process. So I think that real-time solution-based decision-making needs to happen. Number 3 is there's been some concerns about clients not having their voices heard. Oftentimes with this population, if you're in survivor mode, you have everything is a crisis. Everything is a crisis, from the toast wasn't buttered to I didn't have a cot that was in the right place to super concerning issues. It is hard to be able to address stability and positive culture if you don't get rid of the little things. And the way you get rid of little complaints is to have real-time responses and have somebody listen. When I operated the Sullivan, I gave everybody my telephone number. Absolutely everybody. It was a client, if it was a community provider. And that sounds like a stupid idea, but it's not a stupid idea. What it does is it starts normalizing after people know that there's someone there that's going to listen. The idea is to make myself available for those in real time and to make sure that people are being heard, and then to weigh the level and the gravity of the concerns that they're giving. The fourth is going back to transparency. I think it's important for everybody to know what I'm doing. And so a weekly meeting will be set under my recommendations. These are all recommendations. It would be set so that the key stakeholders in the decision making can hear from my perspective what's going on. That is also a time for me to know whether I'm on the right track or whether I'm not. With only 45 days left, this has to be done expeditiously. And I think that the key to healing and to getting a positive environment around these issues is to open up and be transparent about what's happening, what needs to be fixed, and how we can solve it. It's moving from a no but to a yes and. And that's my thoughts.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that outline and the increased accountability and transparency that you are going to bring through your work, and communication, which I think is a critical issue. Any members have questions? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Foland.
Thank you. This may be outside the scope of where you're going to be moving forward with your current oversight, but I'm concerned because recently both the compliance officer and the director of safety for Henning have resigned. I don't know if you know that, or do you have plans to reach out to former employees, or would that be something that would be sort of outside the scope of what you're going to do?
Through the chair, the first thing is to stabilize what is. What is what is. It's not what it was or what it will be. It's what it is. So I think my first focus has to be on what it is. If the 360 assessment suggests that there have been some things that have happened that need to be addressed, absolutely, they need to be part of a report. But I think we have to look present before we look in the past and look into the future. But I do believe in a 360 assessment that you do look at anybody who has any valid, necessary facts to provide them. And I did meet with some of the Henning staff, and they seemed very open to giving me access to whatever I requested.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any further discussion. Thank you so much, Ms. McLaughlin. All right, so then that will take us to our last two items for the remainder of our meeting, plus some time for final audience participation. Just for folks in the audience to prepare, I'm probably only going to have time for 3 individuals for final audience participation. So just start thinking about that. Okay, so first thing is under the demobilization discussion is the timeline update. So in January, I presented some preliminary slides to help the body get a scope of demobilization. Since then, the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness has updated the slides with their data and their better understanding of the homeless prevention response system. So if Mr. Hakama, if you can come up and if you could quickly present these slides to us and just give us some of the critical highlights, necessary information as we delve into the demobilization conversation.
Happy to. Just want to make sure I can be heard this way. Okay, so obviously you've got the setup from Felix. Thank you for that. And go ahead and move to the first slide. Before I get into it, I just want to clear up just sort of the methodology behind this. First of all, we're going to retain Assemblyman Rivera's previous assumptions from his original presentation, which is obviously that neither the Assembly nor the mayor are going to extend emergency shelter locations beyond April 30th. B, the aviator will draw down as planned, and C, we won't see any sort of crisis that results in significant inflow into the HPRS. And then the second major assumption is that to get to some of the numbers that got added to this presentation that previously weren't in the old one, we're looking at utilization numbers based on 3-year averages of AKHMIS data, housing placement data from the Built for Zero public dashboard, and other data that has been shared directly by providers so that we can get a more inside view. So as a reminder, this is what the original presentation looks like. The Sullivan, Alex, and other emergency shelters, plus potential units that might come online. And if you can move to the next slide. Boxed in red are the additions to the slide. So we're looking at Henry House, Gospel, Rescue, DHC. The House of Transformation, I haven't been able to successfully get a hold of the folks over there to get an accurate sense of what their utilization rates look like. So once I get that, this full presentation can be completed and we can have all the final numbers, at least to my knowledge. We also added a box on top to take a look at the differences in who is getting housed and who is going to result in becoming unsheltered as a result of the closure of several other facilities, like, basically everything that closes in April. So this starts at February 15th. Obviously, it is not February 15th anymore, but a month ago, we were looking at the current utilization that you see. And if you could move to the next slide. So we're looking at, other than folks who are staying at the current shelters that we're looking at, around 300 to 325 unsheltered individuals. You'll be able to see the change slide by slide. I want to point out that the warming area, as was the last case, the last time we had this discussion, the number you're looking at is for planning purposes. So that's not the current number of folks that are staying in the warming area, but the folks listening to this presentation on the body, as well as the ACEH, agreed that this was the best way to represent what utilization needs to be looking at based on the timeline that we're reviewing. I just want to point that out. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So by now, hopefully the Barrett Inn will have come online and we're looking at 96 more people housed, but we're while at the same time looking at a drawdown of the Sullivan, the Alex, et cetera. A lot of these other numbers are going to stay the same because despite the fact that you see a lot of folks going and camping and leaving facilities, even though there is space, you're still going to look at consistent numbers at places like Henry House and Brother Francis, just based on their utilization rates. While in the meantime, you see drawdown from other facilities just based on the numbers that providers were giving me. You also see a box in the sort of third row in yellow for outflow and other positive factors. This doesn't get this is basically folks who are just getting housed based on the work that the community and the HPRS is doing month by month to make sure folks are getting into housing. It doesn't account for the housed or unsheltered plus or negatives. It's just to get a good sense that we're constantly thinking that the system is evolving and moving and people are getting housed regardless of what's happening around the system. Okay, go ahead, next one. So by now, we'll have seen the closure of the Sullivan Arena, the Warming Center, the Alex, and the Covenant House. And so we're looking at an unsheltered population of, I'm going to say, at least 825. Obviously, it's difficult to get a sense of every single person who's out there. I think increased capacity with street outreach has allowed us to get a better sense of who is actually homeless in our community and who is unsheltered. Until we can get some structures to make and housing to make sure that folks are getting into housing, we're going to continue to have a large unsheltered population during the summer and beginning in the spring. Next slide. Okay, and now you see the hotel conversion coming online in the bottom left-hand corner. So you get some folks who are housed. So the unsheltered population does move down to 775. This is also a period during the year where we are the least likely to be housing folks based on the way that we're currently doing things. So you're going to see outflow go down as well, just a note. And by now, Brother Francis is also seeing less people utilize their space. Go ahead and move forward. This is a summary of what is to happen throughout July through September. This basically concludes the rest of the summer before we begin to move into the emergency cold weather shelter phase. So the singular numbers outside of parentheses, for instance, if you take a look at, say, Henry House, that's how many folks we're likely to see utilized. That's average utilization per month. And then obviously if you multiply it by 3, you get 150. Go ahead. And of course, by now as well, the aviator has been drawn down as well. Okay, so this is October. You see this say scenario 1, and if you move into the second slide, it'll end up saying scenario 2. This is sort of a TBA situation. We want to take a look at what options and recommendations have been given to the body and what decisions will have made by then to consider 2 different sort of worlds in which we're looking at the HPRS. One is with and without a congregate shelter in place. So this assumes that we do not replace what used to be the Alex Hotel, and this is sort of what we're looking at right now in that scenario. The more we know about the decisions we're going to make in the following months about what to do with people experiencing homelessness, the more we will know about what will happen in the HPRS as a result of the opening of another congregate or non-congregate shelter similar to the Alex. And at this point, we'll be looking at around 700 individuals who are unsheltered before the Sullivan Arena opens back up and we begin resurrecting those infrastructure. And if you flip here, this is all the math broken down month by month. At the very bottom, you see a running total of persons. That is the result of the net difference between folks who are sheltered and unsheltered. Very, very similar to the one that Assemblyman Rivera presented to us originally, just updated for everything that we know we can account for. And as a reminder, I do not yet have the information from the House of Transformation, which means that these numbers will change once I get a hold of that information. I think all of this really reveals quite clearly that our emergency shelter infrastructure that we have is not meant to house people. And unless we have an outreach strategy during the summer and we actually get more housing online, we are going to deal with this pretty much no matter what. And it's really important that we get folks housed so we don't have to look at these large numbers during the summer.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Hakama, for that overview. Really appreciate it. Any quick questions before we move on? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Cross.
District 2, Eagle River, Chugiak estimates there's roughly about 120 so homeless people in District 2 that are scattered about, sometimes living in trees or whatever that is. Is that population taken into consideration? Is this what we have as far as other documentation? I mean, I'm curious how we get to those numbers.
Great question. So in terms of looking at the unsheltered population, we're basically combining all of the information we have about street outreach projects. The ACH runs one of those programs, Rural Crop runs another, et cetera, et cetera. And then we remove the individuals who are already staying in a current shelter or are already housed. Say we do a street out rent event at the Sullivan. If someone's already staying in the Sullivan, either in warming or has a bed, we're not going to count them. If we don't have street outreach or infrastructure in Eagle River and Chugiak and not meeting people where they're at, we're not going to be accounting for those folks. I don't know about any street outreach that we're doing there, but Meg might.
Yeah, so with regard to Eagle River, we also do encampment based outreach by zip code on a weekly rotating basis. We cover the entire geographic area on a weekly basis. So we do, if we're seeing people and making contact with them, we've got them counted.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
This is more of a follow-up. This is more of a statement than a question. I know that these numbers are figuring stagnation, but I'm concerned that that's inaccurate. The Federal Reserve came out 6 days ago saying that they intend to increase unemployment even further beyond the 1% to about 1.5%. We're about 3 million additional individuals on unemployment in order to stifle inflation, which is a very big concern, knowing that our federal government wants less people working. And so that obviously has an unintended consequence to the housing shortage that might resolve short-term inflation because people who are unemployed don't buy as many things. But I think that's convoluted reasoning on how to solve the problems by putting people out of work, but that has been their position. And if our federal government has an intention to increase unemployment, and that's their way of stop inflation, that looks bad for our housing situation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on for the sake of time. Thanks so much to our last part of our discussion today. So for this on demobilization, So for this discussion, I wanted the members who attended today, committee members or not, to engage in a discussion around demobilization. Specifically, I need guidance as the chair of this committee on the viability of the various options that we have before us. I'm going to ask everyone here to speak and let your opinion be known, although I will ask folks to be as brief as possible so we can get through as many of the options we have before us as possible with the time that we have. With this guidance, I will work with community partners and the administration to develop a realistic, achievable, and compassionate demobilization plan that will be put before the body for consideration in April. I will invite representatives from the Emergency Shelter Task Force, Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, and administration to be a part of this conversation as they are willing. So if any of those representatives want to come up and join us at the table, that's great. With that, let's go ahead and put up the slides, please. All right, so this first slide really speaks to the long-term solutions that we have all known about and have been speaking about. So we are all working towards implementing these long-term solutions by the end of the year. We aren't really here to talk about these today, but they do provide some good context. So bringing online the former Barrett Inn, the former Lakeshore Inn, the former Golden Lion, and then of course the permanent, bringing online a permanent year-round low barrier shelter, which again, going back to the comments I made at the very beginning of the meeting, we're really going to be diving into that conversation again, the next iteration of that conversation at the end of this month. Next slide, please. Here's what we are here to talk about, which are the short-term options we have as stopgap measures until the long-term options are brought online. At least some of these are. This slide are the ideas that have been presented to this committee to date, at least my recollection of those ideas that have been presented to the committee to date. First things first, are there any ideas that folks want to add to the list, either omissions that I made or new ideas? At this point, I will not be vetoing ideas, and I ask members to hold off on providing their opinion until we start going through the list. I just ask that any new ideas or ideas that maybe have been missed fit into the categories of realistic, achievable, and compassionate. So I'll go ahead and pause and see if any members, and I guess for folks on the phone who maybe don't have this presentation in front of you, the current ideas that are on the list are continued usage of the Sullivan Arena, sanctioned camps, i.e. safe sleeping areas, usage of the former Alaska Native Charter School, outreach options to include contact-driven and housing-driven outreach. Mr. Cross?
Definition of short-term, is this something that can be implemented within 30 days, 60 days, or what qualifies as short-term?
Yeah, so certainly, the reason that these are on this list of short-term options is that they would have the most immediate impact on the April 30th deadline. So, some of these may not be implementable by May 1, but at least by sometime this summer, they would be implementable. That is how I would define it. Any other ideas to add to the list before we start going through each of these?
Mr. Chair, is this your thought for, I guess, how long of a time frame? Is this going into next winter? Is this just for the summer, or?
No, I'm not imagining that these things are ideas that would be going into this summer, but into this winter. But if that is part of the discussion that members want to have, sure. Is there like something specifically
Well, yeah,
that
I
you're thinking?
think a future idea would be to have smaller scattered warming areas, not just put it at one large location of congregate shelter.
Yeah, thanks. So certainly that's an idea that we could look at for next winter. I think things for here are really focusing on the April 30th deadline. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Well, I know it's not going to happen by April 30th, but I'm just curious, since the Tudor Nav Center is pre-approved zoning, we got plans, we've got everything. It's expedited. It's lacking funding, but we had an expedited timeline on that for winter construction. I imagine during summer construction with more daylight, more workable hours, that it would be able to accelerate those timelines. We'd have to take a look at it, but I don't know why that's not on the list. If we're looking at all options for short term, whether or not you like it, I think that's, if we're willing to stick short-term sleeping camps on that which is very controversial considering how Centennial turned out. Why isn't the Tudor Nav Center on there?
Thanks. I'm happy to address that question. Can we go to the previous slide, please? It is in fact on here. If you look at permanent year-round low barrier shelter, those are long-term solutions though. So that is why it's not on this next list, which I consider short-term. And maybe people are being confused by short-term, long-term, hopefully. Yeah, thanks. All right, then I'll go ahead and turn, aside from members, if there are any other folks who are part of this conversation at the table who want to add anything to that list. Yeah, go ahead.
I wouldn't rule out this is Meg Zalatel, Executive Director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. I wouldn't rule out the possibility of some utilization of non-congregate sheltering, maybe not on a large scale basis, but particularly as we may encounter families who are unsheltered this summer, because their emergency cold weather shelter will end at the end of April as well. Thank you.
Thanks. So are there like specific facilities that would be used for non-congregate?
No, but if these are ideas where we could explore that short-term option, I think it would still fall within your definition of short-term, particularly targeting families and perhaps very vulnerable individuals who might also be getting in line to go to the complex care shelter.
Thanks for that clarification. All right. Okay, so I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue. All right, so then let's go ahead and move on to our next part of our discussion. And unfortunately, I think because of the time change here, several assembly members couldn't be here, so I may need to have this conversation again. But for now, we're going to go ahead and take these one by one, including the new idea that was brought to the table. And as I said before, I really do need everyone here to provide their opinion in brief. We don't have time for long speeches today, so I can put together a viable plan working with community partners and the administration. So with that, let's go ahead and start with continued usage of the Sullivan Arena. What are the opinions of the members on that aspect of the demobilization plan?
I'm a solid no.
Thank you, Mr. Voland. Any other discussion, nuanced or not? And I do really encourage folks to let your opinion be known, because it's the only way that I'm going to be able to put forward a plan that will actually have 7 votes.
Felix, this is Austin.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm driving, so I couldn't text you to get in the queue. I guess I would say that I think for the long-term health of both that area and the people experiencing homelessness who are there, and because of cost, I don't know between short-term and long-term and when it's viable to get away from the Sullivan, but I think that should be our goal, and we should minimize the amount of time we're in the Sullivan to the maximum extent we're able to.
Thanks. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question, Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Thanks. So just based on my understanding of what you just said, so would you be supportive of like and again, I'm just trying to get an understanding of where everyone is at. So please don't be offended, members, by any of the questions that I ask. Would you be supportive of like a more limited usage, like 100, 150 people in the Sullivan versus the almost 500 people we have there today?
I think it depends on what the other options are. And so if there are other options to be in other places that are better for clients, better for residents, and cheaper, I wouldn't support continuing in the Sullivan. But I think that having those options takes time, and we haven't seen those options being worked on by the administration, at least I haven't. And so it's hard to answer that without concrete information about what the various options are. But I would say the least possible time we can be in Sullivan for a number of reasons, the better.
Got it. Thank you for expounding. That's helpful. Okay. Any other opinions that members want to have? And then I'll turn to any other folks at the table. Alrighty. I will do my best with what I got. Okay, so then I'll go ahead and turn and see if anyone else has opinions. All right. Okay, then again, I'll do the best I can with what I got. All right, so then next is sanctioned camps, i.e. safe sleeping areas. Do members have opinions on that proposal that was brought forward to us? Go ahead, Mr. Vogt.
I think we need to have a longer conversation about them. I think we were overly reactive and dismissive of the concept. I will say that I think I asked, it's Michael, right? Michael Hughes.
That's correct.
To send us some of your research that you had did or some links. And I was looking through my email, and if you did email us, I couldn't find it. So if you do get an opportunity to share some information with us, I think that would be helpful. There are several communities in the Northwest that are doing this. Eugene, Oregon has a few of them that they've stood up. John Weddleton, members may know that I had an email of his circulated. He was able to visit a couple in Missoula, Montana, and found, one that was really well operated and one that was really poorly operated. Portland has one. So I don't know. I think it was met with a harsh reaction, and I think the reason for that was because Centennial Campground was so mishandled, and I think when you put very minimal planning, resources, investment into something, that's going to be the outcome, going as far as to say this is not a homelessness response. And so I think that is sort of that reflective pushback that people saw, not only from assembly members, but also from some of our state legislators. I will say on the record, as I have said in community council meetings, that letter that we got from some of our state legislators was disturbing to me in two ways. Number one, it neglected to mention the current situation at the Sullivan, which I feel is there's some alarming things happening there that I've been made aware of, not to mention its impact on the neighborhood. And also in that letter, there was something, and I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of that all of these services should be close to the city center. And I would submit that if you were to look at a map of where homelessness services are, you would see that they are overly concentrated in one area. So I'm open to having the conversation. I think it's not a new conversation, and it's something that can be seriously looked at. Thanks.
Thanks. To clarify your position, and please short response. So are you in support of sanctioned camps as a short-term option or a long-term option?
Short-term.
Okay, thanks. All right, any other opinions on sanctioned camps? Go ahead.
I guess I'd like to look at, and I'll have to talk to development services about this, about some of the restrictions that we've put on as far as, modular construction, at least even in a temporary sense, and what some of our zoning restrictions are in specific site locations, because we can't go to camps. We can go to, I know that the modular construction is not the same as it was 30, 40 years ago. It's a much more professional design. But, even amending some of the things such as, holding tanks, things like that are not currently allowed in residential construction, because if we have a housing crisis, then we need to realize that some of the complications we created or imposed during a different time. And so, I'm going to set up a chance to talk to Ross Knopfsinger, Dave Whitfield, and Lance Wilbur about what that looks like and try to get into what those prohibit. Because the nice thing about modulars and different construction is you can build them offsite, you can build them year round in covered storage, you can build them and then move them into places, even if it's a temporary basis. But I think the unattractiveness to camps is it's not housing, but there's other forms of housing that meet the less traditional needs that we have. And so listen, if we're in an emergency, then we look at all our options and identify those opportunities that provide the greatest resources and the greatest benefit to those in need. And I think we really should be looking at whether that's modular camps, whatever that looks like. So I just know that I'm working on that, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. So I will speak to that later on. Okay, so then I'm just realizing, I guess I'll ask any other members have opinions, and then I will go ahead and give my opinion on Sullivan and sanctioned camps. Okay, not hearing any other members.
I'll just,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to say that I appreciate what Kevin and Dan brought up, and I would like to have the opportunity, I don't know that it will be me, but maybe the person who follows me in this seat, to have a more open conversation about sanctioned camping.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Can I will make this so quick, but I just need to follow up really quickly.
Sure.
There is a reality that whether or not that we keep the Sullivan open, people are going to leave the Sullivan and they're going to move outdoors with warmer weather.
Right.
And so we can say that, people will just go wherever they want to camp. And that's one approach. I will say that one of the main concerns that we heard from the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness when the Sullivan Arena was taken offline and people were moved to Centennial is that whereas everyone was in a more defined area and they were able to make those outreach, they lost a lot of those contacts because people dispersed, people were camping in their cars. And so another positive of having designated safe camps, I think would be able to do that concentrated, more long-term outreach. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to briefly give my opinion on the Sullivan and the sanctioned camps. So regarding the Sullivan, my preference is that we close down the Sullivan and not use it as a emergency shelter anymore. And I guess I'll just note for the record that Mr. Cross is nodding his head. Yes, I'll get to folks here in a second to speak to safe sleeping areas. So that is my very much heavy preference. With regard to sanctioned camps, I just don't see how we can get to sanctioned camps as a short-term option. I do see maybe 6 months down the line, if we do quite a lot of community organizing work and research and planning, that perhaps sanctioned camps can become some type of viable option, but I am just not convinced that they can be a short-term option. That is where I stand right now. So let's go ahead and move on. If anyone on this side wants to speak to sanctioned camps, go ahead.
Thank you. So 2 points. Sanctioned camping or safe sleeping areas does take quite a lead time for planning. I had this conversation with my counterpart at the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness recently. And there's a lot of resources, but you're looking at a 3 to 6 month timeline to really do that work. And then in response to Mr. Volan's point about keeping in touch with people, we learned a lot of lessons from last summer, and with your investment in outreach, we actually are taking the outreach to the people, and we are finding that even when they are scattered site and self-resolving into where they find safe places, we are keeping contact with them. We've taken HMIS and coordinated entry out into the field, really taking HUD's edict to take everything to where the people are. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or opinions? All right, not seeing any. Then we'll go ahead and move on to the former Alaska Native Charter School. Any thoughts or opinions on that possibility that was brought to us by the administration?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say great point by Ms. Alto about maybe the sanctioned camping not being a short-term solution. So I was thinking more generally, but you're right, probably not the best. For the same reason, I think that this building you just mentioned has a lot of issues and has been considered before, but not moved forward with because there would need to be so many changes made. So I don't see how it's realistic that it would be appropriate as a short-term solution, but could certainly entertain any information if that's not the case. But I find it unlikely. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we move on, I need to request a motion to extend. I'm going to ask for 15 minutes.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Any opposition? Seeing and hearing none, we're extended to 2:45. Thanks everyone for your patience as we go through this. Okay, thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson, for that. So like we've been doing for the other ones, I'm going to start with members and then see if anyone else wants to respond to comments or have their own additional comments. So any other members have thoughts on the former Alaska Native Charter School? As I understand it and recall, this the proposal put forward by the administration was to use this as shelter. Not clear if it was short-term, temporary shelter, or long-term.
Could I maybe ask the administration to speak to that? Is that something that's still being considered? Pros, cons?
Through the chair, this was brought up by a private entity saying that they would purchase this building if the city would like to lease it for a homeless shelter because it is zoned correctly. But if that's not the will, we wouldn't be moving forward with that. But that was just an option for us that was made available.
I guess just as a point of clarity, was the option for leasing just short term? Like, did the owner say you could use it for X months on a lease, or did they say you can use it for as long as you needed it?
Through the chair, when they came forward, they were talking about 5-year lease options or shorter for a higher price. But yes, in the long term.
Thank you. All right. Any other discussion from members on the former Alaska Native Charter School? All right. I guess for my part, I simply do not know enough about this possibility to have, I think, a well-informed opinion. Is it an option that maybe is it realistic to look at it for the short term? I mean, possibly. I really don't know how long it would take. Are there any sort of remodeling of the facility that we need to do? Like, all of those questions make me think that maybe it isn't realistic for short term. But if there is interest in this group in sort of exploring that, that's something that I can add to the list.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I haven't seen any kind of inspections or what the current status of the building is, or if it's current on its health and life safety attributes. So, I mean, it's a possibility until I know what those reports say. So right now, it's just, I agree, just a big question mark.
I would also like to learn more.
All right, thanks. So we'll go ahead and move to this side of the table if folks want to add anything.
I was going to wait until you were through with all of the options. Sorry, this is Ann Helzer through the chair. I just wanted the assembly to know that the administration is considering all options and no one option has been foreclosed at this point. And if there is information that we can get, this is apparently from a private donor, this Alaska Native Charter School, that we will make sure that we can get that information to you if we are able to.
So the private donor has not purchased the building yet, though, correct?
Through the chair, no, they have not, but they estimated about 30 days to close.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. This is just a reminder to the members that during the prior facilitation process, the Alaska Native Charter School was looked at quite extensively by the Boutte Company, and those documents should be available for your review.
Thanks. I'm wondering, yeah, can someone, whether it's legislative staff or the coalition, email us? I'll turn to Travis. Maybe if you could ask Claire to dig up those documents and see if she could email it to us. Thanks. Okay. I think that's it for that option. Then the last option, and actually there's 2 more options to discuss after this one. Sorry, folks, is outreach options, including contact driven and housing driven. So any thoughts on that option, which was brought forward to us by the Emergency Shelter Task Force? I'll go ahead and provide my initial thoughts. So this assembly has recently made some pretty significant investments in outreach over the last year-ish. And I think we have seen some pretty positive results. And from what I understand, I need to learn more, but from what I understand about the sort of new outreach approach that the coalition wants to spearhead. I do think it will be beneficial, especially as these additional housing units are brought online over the course of the summer, for us to really look at that housing-driven outreach option. And I don't know yet sort of what the expense is. Do we need to fund it additionally? Those are things that I need to learn more at it to see if it's something viable for us to bring forward for short term. But it's something I'm interested in exploring more. Curious to hear any other thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I am supportive. If I'm understanding what the housing-driven outreach model is, that's kind of that more sustained, longer-term presence. Could you maybe just give us a quick recap?
Sure. So housing driven outreach is where we identify either a number of units coming available and identify the folks that are eligible for those units through coordinated entry. And we do, yes, a sustained housing navigation where we're getting folks housing ready, providing transportation so they can view units. Anything we would do is if we had encountered them in emergency shelter, we're just taking it straight to where they are. Similarly, if we look at the Houston model, they do that as an encampment response. So they make sure they have housing units adequate in order to clear an encampment. So they clear that encampment not because there's shelter space, but because there is housing space.
Great, thanks. Yeah, definitely supportive.
Thanks. Any other opinions on this one? Okay, not hearing any then. See if anyone on this side of the table has any thoughts they want to add. Yeah, go ahead.
Really briefly, like Ms. McLaughlin said, this is kind of a yes and proposition. I would really encourage you to look at how outreach would dovetail with any other opportunities that you may look at, because outreach is going to be necessary. We estimate there are already over 300 unsheltered individuals in our community, and that number is only likely to grow as the weather gets nicer. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to a couple additional items that were brought forward. So first is the idea of non-congregate shelter, facility location unknown, but the idea of us funding continuing usage of some type of non-congregate shelter. Are there opinions on that? And I think the idea was specifically targeting families and vulnerable individuals, as I understood it. Thoughts on that one? Thanks. We're going to be getting to final audience participation soon, sir, but I appreciate you being here. Okay, so then I guess for my part, something worth exploring. I am very much location based, so it's hard for me to even imagine what this might look like without understanding a location. But perhaps those are further conversations that we can have. Okay, so then the last one that was brought up, that was sent to me, was the idea of some type of possible pallet shelter, which I think sort of is in the same lines as modular. I guess I want to turn to the administration. Is this something that you all have looked at, the pallet shelter idea? I think you all have.
Yeah, through the chair to Mr. Rivera, last summer when Centennial was stood up, Pallet had reached out to us. I believe Miss Gross, Monica Gross, was the one who kind of facilitated the initial conversation. They had reached out to us and said that they wanted to pilot some pallet homes in Anchorage. Unfortunately, and still to this day, the time or the Title 21 and 23 restrictions do not allow for pallet homes because they fall under manufactured homes. And we have quite a few restrictions within that subsection. And so there was just no way to stand up pallet homes on PLI land in Centennial Campground last summer. And that's where we stand now. If we want to have a robust discussion around it, I think that's something that we're amenable to, and talk about Title 21 and 23 changes.
No, yeah, that's what I'm working on, and I agree. That needs to be something that's on the table. You know, we got to look at our options, and some of the other things I'm thinking of is, you know, we could also look for opportunities for land lease on, you know, R2M, R3M property, larger lots, and that is, you know, part of the large cost of the private development bringing in is utility placement. But if they are able to let us do a 5 or 10 year land lease for modular construction for homeless, maybe what we do is, to provide housing, is that if we can get a long-term lease, we can put modulars on it. We can bring in the utilities, and at the end of 7 to 10 years, we can sell those if we haven't met our housing goal, look to extend it, or we can leave the utility improvements on the lot as a benefit to the individual who's willing to lease us the land. That way, we don't have to buy the land, because if we buy the land, now you look at the purchase price, but then you're also looking at the utility costs to bring it in. And so I think that there's a way we can work with private development, but again, a lot of what's happening in development services and a lot of what we've done in Title 21 was a different time, and we've complicated some of the construction process. Even just getting things approved, from zoning to planning to assembly approval, that shouldn't take 6 months. We should be able to do that in 45 to 60 days. And we should have a goal of saying, how do we get this process down to 60 days if we can get a plan approval? Because it seems like the only person who can do that is the municipality, because they have the authority to bully departments, but private development doesn't have that benefit. So thank you.
Thanks. So question, and if it could be a short response, Mr. Cross. So do you see this as a short-term option? Like, is there any possibility that we could make the changes necessary to do this in the next 2 to 3 months?
You know, I wish I could say that amending Title 21 was a quick, easy process, but it reminds me of the game of pickup sticks when you were a child and you think that you're just amending one thing, but then all these other code provisions that cross-reference and stuff. And so, you know, it just radiates out. And we find that, look at, you know, we're still making adjustments to our ADU ordinance and now in understanding how it worked with non-conforming properties. And so, you know, maybe there's something that we can do, but that's going to take a proactive and intentional response from development services, because it's not something that the assembly or people in this room can do on our own. And development services, unfortunately, in all municipal departments are already short-staffed. We have an employment problem in all sectors of both private and public employment. Everybody has a lack of employees. So then adding additional burden on a development services. So I'm voracious and I'm, curious and looking forward to taking on the challenge. But I'm a lone crusader in a desolate world.
Great description. All right. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. I have to move us on. Apologies. We need to go ahead and finish up this meeting, and I need to do a final audience participation. So what I will be doing is mulling through everything that I've heard today, and then, as I stated earlier, working with community partners and the administration to see what is achievable in the short term. With that, can I just get a show of hands of how many members of the public here would like to participate in final audience participation? Okay. One individual. Yes, sir. Okay. All right. Well, then come on up, sir. If you can get a mic and if you could speak into the mic, you will have 3 minutes. Welcome. If you could introduce yourself, then I will start the time.
Hi, my name is Thomas Monroe, 92466, and it's dangerous at homeless shelters, period, no matter how you look at it, and it's not all the way it appears. And whether the shift changes every 6 months of pretending like people are homeless, and then they dress all nice somewhere else, but you got to protect the hood, right? And wherever you're at. But it gets to the point you get so scared on all sides that it's nowhere safe after a while. And then people wonder about recidivism and everything else. And, long-term resentments from, politicians, kids, and then their, so the bottom line at the end of the day, I guess, is what it's all about. But it's hard for true transparency when, people are killing their parents and their loved ones for this, turf war. And then the grand manipulation of what's really being said and what's really being done, it's scary. It really is. And so I don't know what the answers are. You guys are the professionals, but, there are liberties that people want to use and they don't really care. Some people is what I'm scared of. And I just don't want, tragedies every single day, everywhere. When is it really going to end? Or it's just not gonna? I don't know. So let you guys decide. I mean, it's your sentence. Say how you want it, I guess. So, but what really goes on here, elsewhere, and things that never get reported. I don't know whether to cry or laugh, but when the mental health lands and they, get into gold minings and then people, start files disappearing, people, I guess that's what you get for helping people out, I guess. So, and then I'm the bad guy, yeah. So I'm a good person. I don't care what anybody says, but I would try and equal it out as best you can amongst everyone. And I don't have the education or the know-how to do that. So hopefully straightforward, up and up, honest people will do that instead of grand manipulation, just pecking at everyone's pecking at everybody, it seems like, for, thinking that they're going to live in a big mansion or retire on a sandy beach. It generally doesn't work out that way. And so, there's some people that want everybody dead at 65. And then what's the average age now? 77. But, having to live at homeless shelters for longevity and not knowing how to do it with everything out there. And,
Thank you.
Okay. So did I go over to 301?
Just a little bit, but that's okay, sir.
Satellite.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you, sir, for coming
I'm
today.
done. Thank you
so
letting me
much.
waste oxygen, I guess. I may need that later on.
All right. So with that,
for
this
letting me
meeting
in.
is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.